The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, a couple of questions. One is one that I'm sure you're aware of, and I'm just going to ask it as a do you agree, and it's not hypothetical, but it's non-specific. Do you agree that persons should not have their assets forfeited without due process and a provable link to criminal activity?
Well, Congressman, it's been a while since I looked at the law on asset forfeiture, so I want to be careful not to...
This is a constitutional, not a statutory
Well, I
question.
believe that in the context of asset forfeiture, we should respect the Constitution.
Okay, so it's fair to say that if somebody has $10,000 in their van, they have it taken from them, and they have to sue to get it back even though they're never charged with a crime, that would be wrong under due process in the Constitution.
Well, again, I'm not trying to make this difficult, but to me, asset forfeiture questions raise all kinds of complicated case law questions about due process, et cetera. But I do believe due process and adherence to the Constitution are incredibly important in the asset forfeiture context as in elsewhere.
Thank you, Director. Now, switching to the matter of Peter Strzok, and I had a long time working with your folks on the personnel side over at Oversight, where we oversee a lot of those things. And I just want to make the record straight now that you're, in addition to being the chief from a law enforcement standpoint, you're also sort of the ultimate head of HR for those tens of thousands of people who are working so hard for us. Is an FBI agent allowed to have a political opinion?
Yes.
Is an FBI agent allowed to communicate that political opinion to their wife or even their mistress?
Yes.
So nothing in a text simply communicating a political opinion would be cause for firing or any other action under the ordinary rules of the FBI or any federal person, correct?
I think each question would have to be based on its own circumstances. Certainly, I can imagine situations, as you're describing, where it wouldn't be, and I can imagine situations where it might be.
Well, so that brings us to a situation now in which an individual is key to the question of whether or not there should be a full de novo review of the FBI's actions as to Hillary Clinton and the decision not to prosecute her, since he was actively involved in that. So my question to you is, since it's clear that whatever Peter Strzok did was sufficient to have him relieved, something that in the ordinary course of simply communicating a political opinion would not cause that, and would be inappropriate to relieve somebody simply for having a political opinion, will you make available to this committee, upon the chairman's obvious request, the ability to see any or all of those 10,000 texts sufficient to understand why this individual was dismissed and how it might be relevant to the question of the objectivity of Director Comey's investigation and conclusions?
Well, there's a couple parts to your question, if I might. First, I want to be clear that the individual in question has not been dismissed or dismissed.
He's not been
what happened
dismissed,
was,
but he's been relieved from the duties he had, and he's,
well,
he's now in HR, which
reassigned. He was reassigned away from the special counsel investigation, which is different than disciplinary action. Second, as to the question of access to the text messages, we'd be happy to try to work with the committee on that. I want to be sensitive to the fact that there is an active, very active, outside independent investigation by the Inspector General, and the last thing I want to do, and I think the last thing this committee would want to do, would somehow compromise or interfere with that. So we'll have to go through a process to assess how we can be sensitive to those operational considerations, while at the same time, as we should be responsive to Congress and this committee and its oversight responsibility.
Would the gentleman yield on that?
of course I yield to Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. We have been in communication with the Inspector General. We very much respect the investigation that is taking place there. And we have asked the Department of Justice, and through them, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for all of the 1.2 million documents that have been provided to the Inspector General, minus those that relate to any particular ongoing grand jury investigation. Now, I have received back from the Assistant Attorney General, Mr. Boyd, a letter indicating that they will make a fulsome response to that request. So I would like, in following up with Mr. Issa's question, to hear you tell us that you will also provide us with that honoring of that fulsome request, because most of those documents that the department has committed to provide are coming from the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Certainly, I don't mean to suggest that we wouldn't be fully responsive and cooperative with the committee. I'm simply saying that we would work with the Justice Department in making sure that we have considered all the appropriate factors that we need to make sure that we're not doing something on the, in terms of unintended consequences with ongoing investigations, but we have no desire to frustrate the very legitimate oversight requests of this committee.
Would the chairman yield for a moment?
Yes, I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. I just want to ask the director if, can this kind, or does this kind of document request of the Inspector General on an ongoing investigation, could it interfere with that investigation? Is it proper to respond fulsomely? I mean, what are the limitations here?
Well, I think a lot of that requires, as the chairman referenced, us to make sure that we are touching base with the Inspector General, since it's his investigation and not ours. If the Inspector General is comfortable with the information being provided and that it's not going to interfere with or impede his investigation, then that's one very, very significant consideration that can be put to the side. So
But if he's not comfortable-
I can commit that our staff will work with the Justice Department staff and your staff to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to be responsive, while at the same time making sure that we're not in some way jeopardizing or compromising an ongoing investigation or revealing something about a grand jury matter or anything like that.
We asked for it minus grand jury material. Obviously, it takes some time to do that. Mr. Boyd committed to a date of January 15, and he's going to require your cooperation. So we want to have your assurance that that cooperation in meeting that date will be forthcoming. We intend to follow up with further letters on clarifying this, but it's very important that we have this information very quickly. The Inspector General is completely cooperative with us in his investigation, but they're not his documents. They are the FBI and the Department of Justice documents, so the request is not directed at him, it's directed to the department, and we need to have full response.
We intend to be fully cooperative with both this committee and the Inspector General.
I robbed the gentleman from California of a bit of his time, so I'm going to...
I have to say I yield back.
I'll be brief,
I
Mr.
couldn't
Chairman.
even yield it to you, but the gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you. Director, at this time, as far as you know, you're not asserting or believe there's any privilege as to those documents. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't reviewed the however many million documents that
I'm only
that's
saying
in
that you,
question.
at this time, you know of no privilege.
I'm not aware of it, but I really haven't asked the question yet, to be honest.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then lastly, since in the case of Peter Strzok and other statements, because this information was not made available to us at a time in which your predecessor, Mr. Comey, specifically said he was breaking precedent and being open and transparent as to the investigation of Hillary Clinton's taking from government possession documents under the Federal Records Act and classified documents. Do you agree that a de novo review at some point by someone is clearly warranted as to whether or not the decision not to prosecute was appropriate?
Well, Congressman, I think what I would say to that is there is what I would consider a de novo outside independent review by the Inspector General into whether or not decisions made, including charging or not charging decisions in the matter that you're referring to, were based on any kind of improper considerations or political considerations. And depending on what the Inspector General finds, there could be any range of possible steps that we or others would have to take in response to those findings.
So it's not a de novo review by the Inspector General, but a review of whether or not impropriety occurred, and as such, a de novo review of that decision not to prosecute Hillary Clinton would be the question.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The
I think
Director may answer the question.
Yeah, I think I can briefly respond, which is, I think of the Inspector General's investigation as de novo in one sense, which is that it's objective, arm's length, no skin in the game, if you will. But you're right that the Inspector General is not second-guessing prosecutorial decisions and things like that. However, the Inspector General is looking at the very important question of whether or not improper political considerations factored into the decision-making. If he were to conclude that that's what happened, then I think at that point we're in a situation where we have to assess what else might need to be done to unring that bell, if you will.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair recognizes